If you joined us earlier, a really warm welcome back to you. If not, a great welcome to the Arable Weed Week. My name is Steve Dennis and I'm Head of Business Development for BASF in the UK and Ireland. Now, if you heard earlier, we were talking about IPM, but this is the Arable Weed Week, so we need to see how IPM and IWM fit into weed control. And to help us with that in our discussion, we have Richard Hinchliffe, arable farmer and Nuffield scholar, and we have Stuart Keevis, who's Business Development Manager for BASF, who specialises in cereal herbicides. So Stuart, good to have you with us. My first question is for you. Now, thinking about IPM, is that just another phrase for IWM and cultural controls?
I think, Steve, a lot of people, when they hear the word IPM and they hear the word pest, they often think about insects, whereas actually the pest in IPM really is much broader than that. It's about anything that's going to attack and rob the yield from a crop. So pest is actually much more broader and it does include weeds, but then we use the IWM to sort of classify really what we're talking about specifically for weed control. But a lot of the things that we're capturing under both those terminologies really are the same, and I'm sure Richard will expand on what he's done here on the farm and what he considers for IPM as well. But all the cultural control techniques, delayed drilling and stale seed beds, varieties, all the way through that you can do, all in capture under IWM, which is embraced under IPM.
And we'll come to Richard in a moment and ask him about that. But before we do, one last question on this. When it comes to sustainability and environmental concerns, it's really herbicides which often take the brunt of the pressure. What should we be doing to protect our licence to operate in this area?
Well, as you know, Steve, all products go through a very, very rigorous registration process. So the government scientists look at the dossiers, evaluate very rigorously for both environmental impact and for human health impact as well. So once a product actually gets to the market, we can be sure that it is safe to use. And I think in terms of keeping products sustainable for us, the key then is that the labels are followed, the wording on the labels are there, they're very important, and any stewardship guidance that we as a company also give to our products, it's important that that's taken on board and those are followed as well.
Richard, you've had your own personal journey with blackgrass, and over the number of years, I wonder what you found to be your key learnings for cultural control for blackgrass management.
Our key to our blackgrass control is a zero tolerance approach. I think that's what we've developed over a number of years, because if you don't take a zero tolerance approach anymore, it can soon escalate out of hand. So that is for number one for us, is really, well, all grass weeds, blackgrass is number one and for one that most people focus on, but zero tolerance, I think, really, if you can get to that, is where it helps to be, because it's about managing your seed bank.
So we're targeting zero tolerance on your farm, Richard. What would you say are the one or two cultural controls that allow you to get towards that zero tolerance?
For one that probably shows the biggest results would be our roguing regime, I would say, because that's where you're getting it's the end of the season, you're looking through your crops, you're monitoring, you're assessing, and you're getting all the stragglers out there, for potential resistant plants. That I would say that's probably the top one that makes the biggest difference to us.
Perfect, thank you. And just thinking about cultural controls in the autumn, have you found over the last couple of really difficult autumns that's affected your ability to do the approaches that you would like to do in terms of establishment?
Yeah, it's because we're no-till, it's an interesting one really, because in a sense you could say we've lost the flexibility of using cultivation as a cultural control, but on a lot of our heavier land it's hard to fully invert the ground properly when ploughing, say, and actually ploughing just makes a wet, muddy mess all winter. And we found similar with a min-till system. zero tolerance needs to go together with no-till, because if you don't, you can soon escalate into a very big problem. So they work together. One of the issues has been zero tilling and delayed drilling, because obviously zero till drills work traditionally better in drier, harder conditions. So it's about working in that and selecting more vigorous varieties and keeping our seed rates at super high seed rates to help competition. That's a big driver as well. And also anything that I would consider slightly weedy, especially from a blackgrass perspective, wouldn't be in a winter crop anyhow. So it would be switched into say a spring barley crop or a winter bean crop even, because that's more a cleaning crop for us than what a high pressure wheat crop would be.
So Stuart, on the earlier session talking about IPM, one of the things that came out is that to be an effective IPM approach, we need to treat fields individually on a case-by-case basis. How do you feel that works for integrated weed management?
Well, I think hopefully going forward that will be very good for farmers and growers. There's a lot more technologies that are now coming to play. Some are out and available, some are still in the development process. And these are going to really help farmers to target where they need to actually apply the chemistry part of the IWM. So we all know that the cultural control methods really help reduce the seed burden and the weed burden and bring it down, but the chemistry is still a key part of that to help get on top of that overall burden. And then with hopefully all these new technologies that are beginning to come on board, then growers can really then target very effectively where the chemistry needs to go to help, you know, a real good sustainable use of chemistry going forward in the future.
And Richard, from a farmer perspective, do you treat all your fields the same? Do you have a pre-drilling prescriptive approach, or is it more nuanced?
When it comes to weed control, we're very fluid and flexible, even down to part field basis. I think it's important not to be working to. It's good to have a plan, but you've got to be very, very prepared to change your plan and adapt and see. And there's nothing more important than, you know, the value of a farmer's boot and an agronomist's boot and walk across a field. And I think that's where technology comes in for future. It's going to be able to focus and help people go to pinpoint these areas easier and manage and record and sensing technology. And it's all to make things more efficient going forward and get better control, because that's what we're all after, is getting the best bang for our buck, I guess.
And Stuart, just thinking about that, and you mentioned chemistry within integrated weed management. Are all chemistry the same, or are there some that you would treat in a different way to others?
No, chemistry is not all the same. Modes of action are different and types of chemistry are different. I mean, in UK blackgrass management, we typically talk about our soil residual chemistry, and then we have our post-emergence contact chemistry. Now, unfortunately, most of the post-emergence contact chemistry, our ALS and our ACCAs, there's a high degree of resistance now to this chemistry. So the reliance on chemical control is really now much more on our soil residual chemistry that we have going forward. And we said with cultural control that we get a great deal of decline through using all these cultural control methods. If we would have around about 500 plants per metre squared and we started using all these cultural control, using the calculations from the Lutman et al. Paper of 2013, we can get ourselves down to 60 plants per metre squared using cultural control, which is a massive reduction from 500. But actually, when you think about it, 62 plants, it's 620 ears, it's over 6,000 seeds. At a 60% viability, that's still nearly 4,000 seeds being returned. So that's why chemistry is still important, and chemistry is still needed at the end of the day to help then get that 62 down to 2. And then with the no zero tolerance approach that Richard has, you know, the hand roguing to really cut it out, that's a very good approach. So chemistry is still a very important part of the whole system.
And the thing is that even at 60 blackgrass a metre square, it's not a roguable level. That longer term, that's not a sustainable place to be. You need to be in, you know, a single plant per 100 metres squared or something, and that becomes sustainable longer term. But when it's a numbers game, and you are just looking at for numbers all the time, and if you take your eye off a ball, or it's amazing if you miss a blackgrass one year and you go back and it's seeded and you see a little clump, and a little clump can be the size of this table. And then if you miss that for next time, you know, you can miss a single blackgrass when we're rogue, and we're all normal people, and you see that clump, and then you go get it, or you have to spray it out if there's a few clumps like that. But if you leave that clump next year, you can be half the size of the shed very, very quickly. And that's the speed of spread until you get to a field scale, and it's just a disaster zone. So you've probably got, you know, 3 years from when it first comes in, and nobody's in that situation now where blackgrasses have just been introduced, unless you're in the northern part of England. But you've got such a short time frame from going from a small manageable plot to field scale, and that's, you know, 3 years, then probably 3 to 5 years, it's just boom, it's exploded, and that's when it all has to go wrong, and you have to get very, very serious and very, very radical.
So building on that then, you've talked about your zero tolerance, Richard, to blackgrass, and Stuart's developed the idea there as well. There's two angles to that. There is actually the competition within the crop and the yield effect, but equally there's the resistance management effect as well, which is going to protect your crop for years to come by managing your population. How do you see, from a farmer's perspective, the relationship between resistance management and integrated weed management?
It's a very, very tough one, because in the UK, we're very limited by mode of action choice. That's probably our biggest issue, because if you look at what we actually has a toolkit available for combinable crops, it's actually very narrow, and it actually falls into a few modes of action, which doesn't help. And then when you consider that actually most of our post-emergence is resistant, the only product you've got really to a growing blackgrass is glyphosate currently. And that, you know, that's either pre-post harvest or crop destruct situation. So it's very, very difficult to practice resistance management when it comes to herbicides within a cereal crop. It's more on a rotation basis. And there in your break crops, you can currently put in stuff like provizamide and carbetamide, but carbetamide isn't for much longer. So that's another active that we're losing. So you're a bit stuck with Hobson's choice, because you're trying to the best to mix you can from 3 or 4 products really, when it boils down to, and that's it. So we're stuck between a rock and a hard place, I would say, and on a practical, on a farm and agronomist level, it's very, very difficult.
So Richard, we've talked a lot about what you're doing on your farm and the different approaches that you're taking. What do you see as the role for companies like BASF in this story? My great aspiration is for industry, for manufacturers, distribution, and for levy boards to work together, like they do in Australia, like what they do with the ARI scheme and for Weed Smart, and actually talk together and communicate together. And so everybody's singing off the same hymn sheet, so we don't get a broken up message. So everybody funds a scheme and actually works together for the greater good, because nobody's got the single solution to herbicide resistance or grass weeds. And going forward in the future, nobody's going to have a single answer. You know, as an industry, I like cooperation, and I like to see that going forward. And I think it's very important that actually everybody working together and collaborating is a very valuable tool. It's together combined, it's a lot stronger, I would say. So a good case made there for cooperation, Stuart, particularly around IPM and IWM issues. What do you see as new technology that's coming along in the manufacturing sector?
I think we can sort of break this down into 2 areas, Steve. So, I mean, on the pure chemistry side of things, I mean, there are new active ingredients and there are new modes of action coming to the market in these next sort of 3 to 5 years. So, you know, UK growers will have the ability to sort of increase that toolbox, Richard, that you said. We obviously have Luximo coming, so that is a new mode of action, but there are others from other companies as well. So that will help expand that area. But also digital tools and innovation tools, so smart sprayers are coming along, other systems where you can variable apply products as well to help with that sort of sustainability sort of side. So I think hopefully we're going into a nice new era, Richard, where, you know, collaboration becomes bigger and better, and companies do collaborate better with growers to sort of get over these challenges, because as you say, weeds is the major pest for wheat breeding, wheat growing particularly in the UK, and we need to make sure we keep on top of that.
I think the key thing going forward with IPM is demonstrating for public and regulators and government that actually we need to demonstrate as well what we're not doing and record what we're not doing, as well as actually record, you know, when we put a plant protection product on, we record that. But I think going forward it might be beneficial or even become compulsory that actually we record our IPM decision-making process to actually show that we've been responsible, we've chose not to use something for a very sensible reason. So we've used, whether it's thresholds or what our decision-making tree has been to get to the end result. And actually, it might prove to be important to show what you haven't done as what it is important now to show what you actually have done to people.
Just to show you've been through that.
Just to show that you've gone through and show your thought-making process. And, you know, technology can come into this as well, because, you know, everyone's got the smartphone and how this is recorded, you know, apps like What 3 Words and stuff like that. Proving to people what thought process that you've gone through before you actually reach for a chemical can could be part of the future outlook or vision for UK agriculture as showing our high standards on environmental stewardship.
I think that would be important. I think it's particularly important to sort of highlight and show the IPM that you have been doing. As you say, I think there's a whole recording area there, because people have talked about IPM at sort of government level and below, but not understanding that actually a lot is being done, but maybe recognising that it's been called cultural control or it's been called integrated weed management, but it actually all is really part of the same umbrella anyway. So I think the industry working together to sort of show, you know, we are doing a lot of this already, but we can build on it, and how we record this going forward as well, I think would be very valuable, yeah.
Because on a practical example, I know it's not weed related, but on the farm this year we haven't used a single insecticide at all. And that's just something that, because of thresholds and for weather, we've had a very cold winter for light, we haven't had a need to spray any insecticide. But because we haven't recorded that we haven't sprayed any insecticide, nobody can actually see that beneficial benefit to beneficial insects and for light, sorry. So just because you haven't done something, or you haven't, it's a weird thing to actually think about going forward, that you might have to record what you aren't doing as well as recording what you actually are doing.
Yeah.
Well, if we say IPM is a bespoke field by field, season by season approach, we are making those decisions, aren't we? It's just a question of recording them.
Oh, absolutely.
Sure
we split treat field all the time. You know, if needs be, we'll put a spring crop in a part of a field that we thought were weedy, or we'll, you know, treat different areas of a field differently. And that's just through agronomic decisions and experience, and just treating it on a bespoke basis. You know, it doesn't have to be on a field by field basis. It can be very localized. And as technology improves, that ability to actually go into smaller compartments will get smaller and smaller and smaller as the tech becomes more available and affordable, which will be an important part as well for adoption.
So thank you for joining us. I think that's been a fascinating discussion. I'm grateful to Stuart for joining with us, but particularly to Richard for hosting us here and giving us his valuable insight into how he's got on top of his blackgrass population by using IPM techniques. Now it's over to you to ask us some questions.
think we're all online today. So good morning to everybody who has joined us on this webinar, and thanks to everybody who has joined us for the second time this morning as well. We know it's a lovely sunny day and there's lots of things to do, so we do really appreciate everybody tuning in to speak to us today. Now, we've got a few questions on the line at the moment. Feel free to keep them coming through just while I introduce our speakers who you heard a little bit from. So we've got Steve Dennis, Head of Business Development at BASF. Morning, Steve.
Morning.
And we've got Stuart Davis, who's the Business Development Manager for cereal herbicides and PGRs for BASF. Morning, Stuart.
Morning, Ali.
I am Ali Richards. I am the campaign manager for cereal herbicides for BASF. One notable guest who isn't here with us is Richard Hinchliffe. He has got a very important job of doing some farming this morning. And as you heard from him in his webinar, he really does have a zero tolerance approach. And this is just key road time for him. So he's doing that and probably many other things. If there are any specific questions that you might have for Richard, we'll note them down, we'll email them to him, and we'll try and make sure that everybody gets those answers. But for now, it's just the three of us. We've got some fab questions on the line, so I'm going to start with the very first question that came in from Molly Leach, which is: how important will soil management monitoring be in tackling blackgrass, for example?
I'll start, and I'll let Steve add on to my answer at the end. Monitoring soil now and monitoring soil health is becoming much more important. A lot more farmers are starting to do that in a lot more detail. I think there's a lot more tools and technology now available to be able to do that in a lot more detail. I mean, one question that I personally cannot answer would be, a healthy soil is good for all seed. Not just the crop seed. I think a healthy soil also benefits weed seed as well. So it's not a case of healthy soil suddenly has an impact on weed seeds germinating and being a competitive problem for us. I think ideally farmers that have heavy blackgrass pressure would like to know where that blackgrass seed is in the soil profile. That would be a very useful tool for them. And then having that knowledge, they could then adapt what they do, particularly from a cultivation point of view. Using the dirty word, the plough could be used if they know burying that seed might be the best thing to do, or keeping it on the surface and killing it and controlling it on the surface there. We do know, obviously, I think there's a general push maybe with no-till, direct drill, that organic matter is going to start building back up in the soil profile. But I think we're probably at a start end of a very steep learning curve in what this impact on direct drilling in the UK will be in terms of weed management going forward. So I won't preempt another question. We'll come back to what that might do to weeds going forward. But I don't know, Steve, if you have anything you want to add.
Yeah, I think I'd like to make a couple of comments about the monitoring side, because this is part of the issue which is very dear to my heart, actually. And I do remember when we tried to do some work looking at resistance development probably 15 years or so ago. And we were looking for locations where we could get consistent records of herbicides inputs over many previous years. And we just couldn't find that going back to that time. We didn't have those sort of records on field by field basis historically. The good news is people are keeping those records now. So we do have that information. But I think for many of us, we could go a little bit further and actually keep records of the performance of products, performance of techniques in individual fields year by year. So we can look back and say, well, last time that field was in winter wheat, what areas had I problems with? What did I do? What were the implications? And actually therefore we can actually make a good map of where the blackgrass seed is likely to be through the soil profile as well, which will drive a lot of our decisions around cultivations, no-till, and so on, to actually manage where that seed is. So I think monitoring and recording, and Richard brought this up in his discussion as well, is going to be increasingly important as we go forward.
Great. Thanks, guys. Very comprehensive answers there from both of you. Moving on now, this is actually a question directed, a two-part question, one directed at Richard, one directed at us all. So the first one directly to Richard was how tillage regime has changed his weed populations. I'm sure that is something that he would love to answer and discuss. So potentially on social media, we can work at getting some of those questions directly to him. The other part of that question is, do you both think that the move towards reduced tillage will see different weed problems emerging?
Probably yes. I think history sort of tells us that key weeds, are what have been called the problem weeds in British agriculture over time, have changed. I can just about remember at the start of my sort of journey in agriculture, wild oats were the bigger problem. Blackgrass wasn't. So what we know with blackgrass is it's very good at adapting. And probably one of the lessons we've learned is just don't do the same thing year in, year out, because it has an ability to adapt to that. But I do think there's a lot of farmers out there who are getting on top of their blackgrass burden. They're getting it down to manageable levels. Zero tolerance, all the hand roguing, etc. But there is a potential for other weeds to start creeping in. Weeds, they do what they do. When one is no longer there, another one pops up and takes over the space. We know ryegrass is increasing in the UK, and those patches where it's becoming difficult are probably growing slightly. There's talk of bromes. Whether bromes are or aren't an issue, I don't think we have a real handle on the situation with bromes yet, but they may favour certain tillage systems better than what they've had in the past. And then obviously, there was on the internet, people are the other day asking about fescues and what's the situation with those as well. So I think, the eye is out there for the moment on what might come if blackgrass recedes a little bit. I can't see blackgrass going away. It will always be there and be a problem for us, I think, but there is the potential for other grass weeds to sort of start finding a bit more room to be a problem for us.
Yeah.
I think you change any dynamic and something else comes in, doesn't it, and potentially fills that space, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops. And I think one big thing which will influence that development will be the future of glyphosate as well, and the effect that's had on some perennial weeds that we don't tend to think of too much now. Will they become more significant if glyphosate goes as well? So yeah, I think, as Stuart says, something will change, won't it? Whether we predict it or not, another question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, both. So we've got a question from Steve. Steve actually joined us earlier as well. So thank you, Steve, for staying with us. He's got a great question. So is a competitive crop just as important or even more important than chemical control? Try not to be biased.
A competitive crop is a very useful tool, absolutely. We've seen it particularly probably with hybrid varieties as well, but there's a lot of sort of factors that sort of come into play, the seeding rate, the row width you're using, when you're drilling as well. We try and make this distinction between sort of delayed drill and late drill. I think it's well known now that crops drilled too late become uncompetitive, leave too much space. And it will also always depend, I think, on the weed burden pressure that you've got in the field to start with. I think if you're starting from a high weed burden pressure, the competitive nature of the crop will do something, will be part of that overall cultural control, but it probably won't be enough on its own. The chemical is still going to be needed. If you're in a situation where your weed burden pressure is, a very low level, then you might be in a place where hand roguing, mechanical weeding, etc., might be good enough for you. I'm hoping that was unbiased enough.
I look at things quite black and white when I see a question, and I can see you're asking a competitive question here, which is the best, crop competition or chemical control? And I guess the answer is the one that is the best is the one that you've achieved the best in that location. And if you've got cracking chemical control that you've achieved, then that probably is the best in that situation. But it's hard to argue against the fact that achieving a competitive crop will improve the performance of your chemistry. So they will work together, won't they? And I like the way the question is phrased, but perhaps we need to think about how we can use them complementarily rather than putting them one against the other. So both really, really critical. And the more you can achieve in terms of crop competition, the better.
Yeah. Great, thank you both. Great answers. So again, this is another question from Teresa, which is Teresa Rush, which is directly towards Richard. I'll read it out and then try and rephrase it so that we can give an authentic answer from our perspective. So, Richard said that he would like to see industry scientists, levy boards, and farmers working more closely together. What is needed to make this happen? Who should be the driver of this? Should it be a formal process, or is it something farmers should be looking to do at a local level? And I guess from our experience, my question to you both would be, what is manufacturers' role in doing that? What can we do to support? What are we doing? How do you see that playing out over the next few years?
I'm going to let Steve go first on this one.
Oh, very good. Thank you. I suspect there's probably more going on than is appreciated at the technical level. I think if we're talking specifically about blackgrass, I think you'd find there's a huge overlap actually in what different manufacturers are saying in terms of the sustainability issues, in terms of the importance of IPM, IWM, in terms of the rotational benefits, in terms of mixing chemistry, in terms of protecting more vulnerable chemistry for resistance development. Yes, we are competitive in terms of our product choice, but I think the big overriding messages are actually very similar for the manufacturers there. And I think we do work together with the industry, with scientists, with levy boards, as it said there, in terms of coming up with research around the technical approach to grassweed control. Can we do more? I'm sure the answer is yes. And I think if there's other organisations who want to drive that research, I'm sure ourselves and other businesses would be really interested in talking and starting that dialogue and getting involved.
Absolutely.
Probably nothing more to add, Ali, from my end.
To add, Stuart. No, and I think one of the most important things is talking to people like Richard and getting his perspective on what it is that we need to do a little bit more of. So again, something that we can try and reach out to Richard and ask and get his answers potentially on social media to share with everybody. Moving on, and something we have discussed in this morning's webinar as well. Anybody tuned in, you will be able to access that in on a catch up at some point. But something we did discuss this morning from and this is a question from Marianne Curtis. So regarding recording what we do, how do you quantify what you haven't done? So we talk a lot about recording what we do, but what about all of those decisions not to do something? How do we record that?
I mean, I think that would have been a good one to get an answer from Richard as well, because obviously he's live in that environment. But I think, you know, as he indicated in the interview there, I think a thought process is going on. You know, as he pointed out with the insecticides, either the thresholds are not met. There's a decision process that is going on, and it's how to capture that decision process. You know, obviously farmers do have to record everything that they spray on a field, and those records are really good. Is there a part of that recording system that allows a decision process has been made, and the answer is not to spray, and that is then recorded in that place as well? I think that's sort of what Richard was sort of getting at when he was discussing that in the interview there.
I think if there's some kind of flow chart that you work with on your farm, or some kind of decision tree that you work through, do I do this? Have I done this? Actually, you will end up recording what you don't do as well. If you go through the process of thinking about it, just as Stu says, and decide not to do it, then that is part of the recording as well. So I think that's really powerful.
And just a comment from CG here to reflect some of those comments. Accurate spray recording is standard. Can't we use this existing data to show what we haven't done?
Yeah, I mean, I don't look at some spray books. So if a spray book does record what you haven't done, but as Steve was sort of saying, you know, a sort of a flow tree, decision tree to get to the point to spray, it's just sort of backing up that information on that decision tree and capturing the first parts of that decision tree and having that recorded down. And if that is in part of a spray book, then absolutely.
I think the comment is good. I think if we are recording exactly what we are doing, then by default we are recording what we're not doing. I think one of the points Richard was thinking about, actually we can go a step further by actually pointing that out to people and making that really clear that we're not doing something. Don't rely on them to just make the assumption because we haven't said we're not. We should actually point that out to people a bit more from the sustainability point of view. There's an industry discussion there, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So a couple more questions left. We do have time if anybody else has got anything that's just kind of sparked in them as they're hearing these conversations, please feel free to keep asking those questions. Another question from Teresa here. So Richard suggested that his move to zero till has meant that he has lost some flexibility in terms of cultural control of grass weeds. As more growers move towards this type of system, what are the implications in terms of how we use herbicide inputs and in terms of resistance management?
Steve touched on the word glyphosate. You know, what happens with glyphosate going forward, I think could have a big impact on that, and whether people have to revisit a little bit their cultivation techniques. I think, as we've also mentioned before, one of our learning experiences with blackgrass management is be flexible and not keep doing the same thing year in, year out, because it adapts. It seems to be able to adapt to that, or if it doesn't adapt, a different weed that becomes just as problematic might well adapt to that. I think you know, no-till obviously is doing very good for the soil health side of things, but I think we've got to step back and also look at the tools that we have in our armory at the moment and trying to get the best out of all of them. As we mentioned in the video, soil residual chemistry, when it comes to the chemical element of control, is really what you have available to you as your in-crop herbicide control for blackgrass. Soil residual chemistry needs certain variables to get it to work at its best. These are perfectly achievable with no tillage direct drill systems, but do just need to take that all into account. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm from, Steve. I don't know if there's more you want to add.
I guess the point is that if you move to zero till, then by definition you lose tools, don't you? that is what the word zero means. When you do that, you're taking away tools you had before. And of course, the move to zero till is not a move that is done primarily for blackgrass control, is it? It's done for a number of reasons, which will vary, of course, depending on where you are, what your soil type's like, what part of the country you're in, and so it will be a complex answer, I would say, that will vary a lot from location to location. And that just drives us to go in with a record keeping mindset as you make that switch to that system. But beyond that, yeah, it's as Stu says, really.
Great, thanks both. Now we have one question left. Again, there is still time for those of you still with us on the line to ask, but it is fitting that the last question is from an industry celebrity. We're very honoured to have John Cousins ask a fab question to us this morning. So John asks, Richard talks about roguing as a way of implementing his zero tolerance, preventing seed return philosophy. Do you see new tech like HWSC, surfing and inter-row cultivations as other ways of implementing zero tolerance in the near future? If so, which of these do you see as having most potential?
It's a great question, John. I mean, you know, I've been in the field with John and discussing this and seeing some of these technologies with him. Absolutely, I think some of this new technology can certainly work in alongside what is currently being done, and I think some people can set up their systems to get the most out of these new technologies. I think they're all part of the whole integrated solution. Whether these would replace any one part that we're currently doing now is an open question, and there's more research being done on that. Inter-row hoeing, I think, is something that has the potential to maybe replace the hand roguing side of things, but each system has slight downsides. Inter-row hoeing doesn't take out the blackgrass that's in the row, in between the rows, so whether it really helps reduce and makes the hand roguing a lot quicker and a lot cheaper than it is for guys with zero tolerance. Surfing and things like that do depend on the weed species. We know blackgrass has this ability sometimes just to keep its head below the crop if it thinks someone's going to come along and cut its head off, or it's not there at harvest time, the seed has shed. Whereas with some things like ryegrass, these seed destructors on the back of combines can work for those sort of weeds. So it does depend on the weeds that you're looking to try and control. But I think absolutely all these new tools and, things like mechanical weeding have been around for a long time, but it's, again, the technology is really vastly improving and making it much more feasible aspect to sort of add into the whole integrated system going forward, I think.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart. Anything to add, Steve?
I mean, it's as Stu says again, and I mean, anything like this, if it as they get better, as they get more effective, have to be positive steps, don't they? Because we need every approach we can have, and this is a real low risk resistance development approach, isn't it? So it's got to be really useful as it improves, but equally we've got to be controlling our blackgrass still while these are in development, but the sooner they come, the better, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do actually have two more questions, so you're not off the hook yet, lads, I'm afraid. So a question from Teresa. So loss of herbicides and other crop protection inputs is a significant challenge for minor crops. As we perhaps move to more diverse rotations, is this going to pose problems, and what is the likelihood of seeing new herbicide developments in these crops?
It's difficult, quite honestly. There may well be new herbicide developments, but it will likely come on the back of herbicides that can be used in more major crops that are able to move into those crops. There are some options coming over the next few years which can move into more minor crops but they are largely existing chemistry that's used elsewhere. I think as we move into a more and more challenging regulatory environment, it's going to get even more difficult. The good news for some of these crops is actually some of these more cultivational controls, some of the things that John picks up are actually more suited to those crops, and actually they could become an answer for those more quickly than perhaps in the cereal crop. But yeah, it's going to be a real challenge.
Yeah, I mean, the only one I'd add into that we, another new technology that we haven't discussed yet would be things like smart sprayers that are only, applying the herbicide where they see the weed in the field. And again, in some of these other crops, they're probably much more suited, much quicker to work in that sort of crop. And whether there's anything that can sort of be done at a regulatory level, if you really are reducing the amount of herbicide you're applying and really being very bespoke and where that is being applied on the field, whether that will help keeping some of the chemistry available into those crops as well.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Stuart. So last question here is again from CG. So new technology gives new options. We are expecting the small robots to start on brome control here next year, and it will keep my records. Isn't it also a great zero tolerance for yield robbing weeds?
Yes. I don't have a lot of experience, I'm afraid, with the with robot weeding at the moment, so I've not had the chance to get out and really see it and understand it. Again, I think it's something in some of the minor crops or wide road crops that could be very, very useful. Have to sort of see how the technology can expand up to work on sort of broadacre wheat, barley, oilseed rape, where we got some very big fields here in the UK, but you get people talking about swarms of these small robots, solar powered, set them off they go and work in the field, and the spraying never has to go in the field. I think that's some people's idea of where we might get to. We have to wait and see where things go with that. It's all good ideas, but there could be downsides as well. But it's interesting stuff to look at, definitely.
Look, it's got to be positive, hasn't it? Any new technology has got to be a good thing. Ultimately, we need profitable agriculture in the UK, and I think different businesses, lots of businesses, you mentioned one that are obviously very at the forefront of this, but there are a number of other technologies as well. Stuart mentioned smart spraying as well, but other robot technologies as well that are actually becoming more advanced in their development now. And this is all good news, I would say. The more diversity we have in technology, the better it is for all parts of the industry. So it's very good news, to answer your question. Yeah.
Absolutely, and CG's just commented that they are on blackgrass in wheat now in Berkshire, and I'm sure we'll want to follow that. And if you've got anything, CG, to share with us in terms of your experiences, we'd love to learn. So feel free to reach out. We'd love that. So I think at that point we've got about 10 minutes left, but we've had a lot of questions on the line already. So I'm just going to leave it with a question that I have to you both, and I've not prepped you for this. So it's very poor form, isn't it? But I'm just going to keep you on your toes. So we've talked a lot about cultural control and its relationship to chemistry, and we've touched on the weather a little bit. And this is more just kind of general advice that you can give to people on the line at the moment after two pretty horrendous autumns, and we've all got our fingers and toes crossed for an autumn that everybody deserves. However, on the back of two autumns, what is your general advice to people going into the autumn this year in terms of balancing those cultural controls, those IPM messages, delay drilling being a big one, and actually making decisions based on balance for a profitable crop going into the autumn?
I mean, absolutely, Ali. I think the base messages around cultural control don't change. They're still absolutely relevant. I think we understand the anxiousness from growers about wanting to get their crop in the best conditions and getting it away well to achieve the best yield potential from that crop. We would just probably reiterate, work again this year has shown just a big difference in blackgrass pressure from a September drilled crop to an October drilled crop. That just in the untreated, the pressure from the blackgrass was immense in that germination. So the advice around being able to delay that drilling is still very, very valid. I think understanding your farm, your situation, your soils, your machinery, what delayed drilling really means to you. People do sort of have a set date sometimes in their mind, and the whole world seems to want to go to that set date. Where I think the date is relevant to you and your farm as to where that is. But just be aware that the pressure and germination from the blackgrass, it significantly reduces the longer you can delay that drilling before getting into too late. So this October window for winter wheat is still a very, very valid one. And we're seeing a little bit sort of black and white, probably with blackgrass pressure in the field right now. I think there are many places where the soil residual worked well last year and people are very happy with the control. But then there are places where, either they couldn't get in where they wanted to, it was a little bit late, or they couldn't get, things like the Avadex on as well. And there's some places where there's a lot of blackgrass sticking through crops right now, and that's all potential seed return for next year as well. So understanding now where the blackgrass is in the field and on the farms, and working towards planning your cultivations and your drilling next year with that in mind as well.
Yeah, thanks, Stuart.
I said to people this time last year that we can't have another autumn as wet as the last one, and of course then that's exactly what we did get. So I'm not going to be bold enough to say we can't have it again. I mean, it could happen, couldn't it? But the research doesn't change, does it, on the base of that? The research is really clear. Delayed drilling is very, very helpful for blackgrass management. And Stuart commented on that. He's absolutely right. And if we can't get the control early in the crop that we need for blackgrass, we will never catch up. If we do not, by a combination of delayed drilling in difficult situations and good control from residual herbicides early on, if we do not achieve that, we will not ever get back from it. So it's thinking about your populations, and you need to make the decision based on your own farm and your own knowledge. Look back at the records you have and make a decision, and maybe there are some fields you can get in a little bit earlier, but where you've got a blackgrass issue, delay it, because cobbling it in as quick as you can and then just regretting it for the next 10 months is not really a better solution than not getting it in, I would suggest. So hold the nerve a little bit.
Yeah, clear messages from you both there, so thank you. There's just another little comment from CG for everybody on the line. If you click onto the questions section, actually he's put he or she has put the link onto the small robot company, and just a little comment to say that they really do listen to their farmer advisory group, and it's a really exciting to be a part of this, and I'm sure lots of people will want to have a look at that and learn a little bit more, so thank you for that. This is the end of this Q&A session. Thank you so much to everybody for joining us. We really enjoyed those questions, and we hope the answers were useful. What I will say is that there is a third webinar if you want to if you want to join us a little bit later. Steve Dennis is actually going to go through a resistance masterclass with us. So it's a shorter webinar than this. It's only about 10 to 15 minutes where Steve will kind of take you through that process of resistance management. Both Stuart and Steve will be on that Q&A panel afterwards, really specific to resistance management. So if you're interested, please come along to that. It's between 2 and 3 p.m. today. So we'd love to see you again. But that is all for us just now. So it's goodbye from me, Steve and Stuart. See you all later.
Thank you.
Bye.
That's the end of today's session. Thank you again for joining us, and we hope you found it useful and informative. To find out more and to sign up to take part in any of the live sessions, visit the Arable Weed Week Hub at www.croptecshow.com/Arable Weed Week.